The gavel echoed through Manhattan Family Court, room 302, sounding like a gunshot in the dead silence. Naomi Sterling stood heavy with an 8-month pregnancy, the phantom weight of her ruined custom silk wedding gown still fresh in her memory. Across the polished mahogany tables sat the man she had almost married, Arthur Pendleton, handsome and possibly wealthy, and a meticulously calculated monster. 3 months ago, Naomi left him standing at the altar in front of 400 high society guests. The media called her unhinged, a runaway bride broken by the pressure of marrying into a dynasty. But the world didn't know about his Zurich business trip. They didn't know what she found in the false bottom of his locked briefcase. Today, the truth was going to cost him everything. "State your name for the record," the bailiff instructed, holding out the microphone. Naomi adjusted her posture in the witness stand, her hands resting protectively over the pronounced curve of her stomach. She smoothed the skirt of her tailored navy maternity dress. Her rich, dark brown skin glowed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom, a stark contrast to the pale, drawn faces of the Pendleton family sitting in the gallery. "Naomi Joyce Sterling," she answered, her voice steady, betraying none of the absolute terror that had consumed her for the past 90 days. "And your relationship to the plaintiff, Mr. Plaintiff, Arthur Pendleton?" asked Beatrice Carver, Naomi's powerhouse of a defense attorney. Beatrice was a shark in a tailored suit, known for dismantling New York's elite on the stand. "I am his former fiancée," Naomi said, locking eyes with Arthur. He sat beside his high-priced lawyer, his posture relaxed, a perfectly tailored charcoal suit draping his broad shoulders. He looked back at her with that same patronizing, cool stare he had perfected over the last year. "And I am the mother of the child he is currently attempting to seize full custody of." Judge Robert Harrison, a veteran of family law with no patience for theatrics, peered over his reading glasses. "Counselor, your client is requesting sole legal and physical custody, terminating Miss Barney. Sterling's parental rights before the child is even born based on allegations of severe mental instability. I suggest we get to the root of these allegations quickly." "We will, Your Honor," Beatrice said, pacing in front of the stand. "Miss Sterling, let's take the court back to the beginning, before the cancelled wedding, before the media circus. How did you meet Arthur Pendleton?" Naomi took a breath, feeling a sharp kick against her ribs. The memory of their meeting felt like a lifetime ago, belonging to a naive, trusting woman she no longer recognized. "We met 14 months ago at a gala for the New York Architectural Preservation Society," Naomi began, her voice carrying through the silent room. She had been a 29-year-old rising star at a boutique architectural firm, celebrated for her innovative integration of sustainable green spaces into historic urban buildings. She was confident, independent, and completely focused on her career. Then came Arthur. At 33, he was the executive vice president of Pendleton Holdings, a massive commercial real estate conglomerate. He was charming, aggressively attentive, and swept her off her feet with a dizzying display of love-bombing. Within weeks, Arthur had woven himself into every fabric of her life. He sent cascading arrangements of white orchids to her office, whisked her away on private jets to the Hamptons for dinner, and spoke endlessly about his desire to build a family. He portrayed himself as the lonely heir, desperate for a genuine connection away from the shallow socialites his family pushed upon him. "It moved incredibly fast," Naomi testified, her grip tightening on the wooden railing. 6 months into our relationship, I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't planned. I was terrified. But Arthur was ecstatic. Arthur's reaction had been a masterpiece of manipulation. He had dropped to one knee right there in her cramped Brooklyn apartment, pressing a flawless 4-carat emerald-cut diamond ring onto her finger. He promised her the world. He promised her safety. And how did his family react to the news of the pregnancy and the engagement? Beatrice asked, flipping open a manila folder on her desk. Naomi's gaze drifted past Arthur to the gallery, landing directly on Caroline Pendleton, Arthur's older sister. Caroline sat rigid, her face an unreadable mask of Botox and cold calculation. They were surprisingly accommodating. Naomi chose her words carefully for the court, but it was suffocating. I moved into Arthur's Upper East Side penthouse, and almost immediately my life was no longer my own. Caroline, in particular, became intensely involved. Involved in what way, Ms. Sterling? In my medical care, in my diet, in my genetics, Naomi stated, the bitterness finally bleeding into her tone. The red flags had started as pink, delicate ribbons. Caroline, who had openly struggled with severe infertility and a string of failed marriages, suddenly appointed herself Naomi's shadow. Caroline fired Naomi's longtime OB-GYN, replacing her with Dr. Eris Miller, an exclusive high society concierge doctor who only saw patients on the Pendleton payroll. Caroline dictated Naomi's meals, sending a private chef to the penthouse to ensure Naomi was consuming optimal nutrients for fetal development. There were invasive comments about Naomi's family medical history, specifically questioning the mental health of Naomi's late mother, who had suffered from clinical depression before passing away from cancer. At the time, Naomi rationalized the overbearing behavior. She told herself it was just how ultra-wealthy, legacy-obsessed families operated. She thought Caroline was just being a protective, overly eager aunt. They didn't treat me like a soon-to-be family member, Naomi told the hushed courtroom. They treated me like a vessel, a surrogate they happened to be hosting. Objection, Your Honor. Objection, Your Honor. Speculation and highly inflammatory, Arthur's attorney, Gregory Finch, barked from his seat. Sustained. Keep to the facts, Miss Sterling, Judge Harrison warned. The fact, Your Honor, Beatrice Carver interjected smoothly, is that the Pendleton family's interest in Miss Sterling's pregnancy was not rooted in familial love, but in a highly orchestrated, premeditated contract. A contract that brings us to the events of October 12th, the business trip. Beatrice turned back to Naomi. Miss Sterling, tell the court what happened exactly 2 weeks before your scheduled wedding day. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as Naomi adjusted the microphone. The baby gave another violent kick, as if sensing the adrenaline surging through her veins. Arthur told me he had to leave for an emergency acquisition in Zurich, Naomi said, her voice dropping an octave as the memory washed over her. It was October 12th. The wedding was a fortnight away. The penthouse was overflowing with floral samples, seating charts, and the chaotic energy of planning a massive socialite event. Naomi was exhausted, her swollen ankles aching, her mind foggy from the intense prenatal vitamins Dr. Miller had prescribed her vitamins that she would later learn contained heavy doses of a mild sedative to keep her docile. He was incredibly agitated that morning, Naomi recalled, painting the picture for the judge. He said a massive European merger was falling apart, and he needed to be on the ground in Switzerland for 4 days to salvage it. He packed in a rush, kissed my forehead, and told me to rest. Did you suspect anything was wrong at that moment? Beatrice asked. No. Arthur traveled for work constantly, but a few hours after he left, I received an email from our wedding planner. She needed Arthur's social security number and a scan of his passport to finalize the legal paperwork for our marriage license in New York. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I assumed he was over the Atlantic. Needing the documents immediately to avoid delaying the license, Naomi had walked into Arthur's meticulously organized home office. The room was usually off-limits, a sanctuary of dark wood, leather, and locked filing cabinets. Arthur had always been possessive of his space, claiming he dealt with highly sensitive corporate trade secrets. I was just looking for his passport scan on his desktop computer, or a physical copy in his desk, Naomi explained to the judge. But his main desk drawer was locked. As I was looking for the key, I noticed his vintage leather briefcase shoved into the back of his closet. It was an old, heavy oxblood leather briefcase with a brass combination lock. Arthur hadn't used it in months because the right latch was prone to sticking. He had clearly taken his new, sleek Toomey carry-on to Zurich, I remembered the combination. It was his late grandfather's birthday, Naomi continued, the tension in her jaw tightening. I managed to jimmy the broken latch open. I was hoping his spare passport or old tax documents with his social security number would be inside. And did you find his social security number, Miss Sterling? Beatrice prompted softly. No, Naomi said, her eyes locking onto Arthur's. He had finally dropped his arrogant smirk. A muscle in his jaw twitched violently. I found a secondary burner phone. I found boarding passes. And I found a black leather binder. Let's start with the boarding passes, Beatrice said, walking over to her evidence table. She picked up a plastic evidence bag containing 2 printed Delta Airlines tickets. I present Exhibit D, Your Honor. Flight records. Miss Sterling, where were these tickets to? They weren't to Zurich, Naomi said, the betrayal still a bitter pill on her tongue. They were for a first-class flight to Portland, Oregon, departing that exact morning, returning 4 days later. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel once. Order. Proceed, Ms. Sterling. Why Portland? I didn't know at first, Naomi said. My hands were shaking. I couldn't understand why he would lie about being in Europe. I turned on the burner phone. There were no contacts saved, just a string of text messages to a single number. Naomi took a deep breath, reciting the texts that had been burned into her retinas. The texts from Arthur said, "Boarding now. Everything is finalized on my end. She suspects nothing. Have the clinic prep the secondary paperwork." The reply from the unknown number read, "Dr. Miller sent the final psychological evaluation today. Once the baby is born, her rights will be terminated within 48 hours. See you at the clinic." A collective gasp echoed in the courtroom. Even the seasoned court reporter stopped typing for a fraction of a second, her eyes widening. "Objection." Gregory Finch shouted, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the wood floor. "This is hearsay, Your Honor. The defense is attempting to introduce unverified text messages to paint a defamatory picture of my client." "I have the phone right here, Your Honor," Beatrice countered smoothly, holding up a second evidence bag containing a cheap, black, prepaid smartphone. Subpaned cell tower data confirms the device was purchased by Arthur Pendleton's corporate card, and the receiving number belongs to the Hopewell Surrogacy and Adoption Clinic in Portland, Oregon, an agency owned entirely by Pendleton Holdings. Judge Harrison stared at the phone, then looked at Arthur with a gaze that could freeze boiling water. "Overruled, Mr. Finch. I suggest you sit down." Miss Sterling continued. "What was in the black leather binder?" Tears finally pricked Naomi's eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound, terrifying rage. She remembered sitting on the floor of Arthur's pristine office, her pregnant belly aching as she flipped open the binder. "It was a master plan," Naomi said, a voice shaking with quiet fury. It was titled The Sterling Resolution. It contained dozens of documents. The first was a financial contract between Arthur and his sister, Caroline. Naomi pointed a trembling finger toward the gallery, right at Caroline Pendleton. Caroline couldn't have children, but she wanted a Pendleton heir. The contract outlined a financial transfer of $20 million from Caroline's trust to Arthur's personal accounts. In exchange, Arthur was to secure an heir, but they didn't want to use a traditional surrogate. They wanted total control. They wanted a woman who had no prominent family to fight back, a woman they could easily discredit. The courtroom was dead silent. The air felt suffocatingly thick. "Arthur sought me out," Naomi continued, the devastating realization ringing out. "He targeted me. He knew my mother had a history of clinical depression. He knew my father passed away when I was young and I had no siblings. I was alone, a perfect, healthy, isolated target." "What else was in the binder, Ms. Sterling?" Beatrice pressed gently, guiding her client through the trauma. "Medical evaluations," Naomi choked out. "Written by Dr. Aris Miller. They were entirely fabricated. Dr. Miller had been writing fake reports after every prenatal visit, documenting that I was experiencing severe prenatal psychosis, paranoia, and violent mood swings. He claimed I was a danger to myself and the unborn child. I had never experienced any of those things. I was perfectly healthy, but Arthur was building a paper trail. To what end? Judge Harrison asked, his voice entirely devoid of its usual judicial neutrality. He was leaning forward, appalled. To invoke a clause in New York family law regarding severe maternal incapacity, Beatrice Carver answered for her. She pulled a thick stack of papers from her briefcase and handed them to the bailiff to pass to the judge. Your Honor, as you can see in Exhibit E, Arthur Pendleton had already drafted an emergency ex parte order for sole custody, predated for the week of Ms. Sterling's due date. The plan was to marry her, ensuring the child was born in wedlock under his legal purview. Immediately after she gave birth, they were going to use Dr. Miller's fraudulent psychiatric evaluations to have Miss Pan Sterling involuntarily committed to a private psychiatric facility owned by Pendleton Holdings. Beatrice turned to face Arthur, her eyes flashing with righteous indignation. While she was locked away, heavily medicated and legally silenced, Arthur would gain full custody. 2 months later, he would file for divorce on the grounds of her incurable mental instability, legally severing her parental rights. And the baby would be quietly adopted by Caroline. Naomi finished the sentence, a single tear escaping and tracking down her cheek. I wasn't a fiancé, I was a free incubator. And my wedding was supposed to be the final trap closing around. The courtroom air was so thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. Judge Harrison removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose as he processed the sheer magnitude of the conspiracy laid out in the black leather binder. The Pendleton family, masters of real estate and corporate acquisitions, had attempted a hostile takeover of a human life. Counselor Finch, Judge Harrison said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, directing his ire at Arthur's attorney. If these documents are verified, your client is looking at charges of conspiracy, fraud, and attempted unlawful imprisonment. Do you have an explanation for these psychiatric evaluations? Finch stood, buttoning his suit jacket with a practiced, albeit slightly trembling, hand. Your Honor, these documents were stolen from my client's private residence. Furthermore, they are merely drafts, contingency plans. Arthur Pendleton is a man of extreme wealth. He was simply protecting his unborn child from a woman who had a documented history of mental instability, as attested to by a licensed medical professional, Dr. Aris Miller. Beatrice Carver, Naomi's attorney, let out a sharp, derisive laugh that echoed off the mahogany paneling. A documented history manufactured by a doctor on the Pendleton payroll. The defense calls Dr. Aris Miller to the stand. A hushed murmur swept through the gallery as Dr. Ta. Miller entered the courtroom. He was a man in his late 50s, sporting a silver Rolex and a bespoke Italian suit that spoke more of his clientele than his medical prowess. As he took the oath, he avoided making eye contact with Naomi, instead fixing his gaze on the back wall. Beatrice approached the witness stand like a predator circling wounded prey. Dr. Miller, you have been the Pendleton family's primary physician for over a decade, correct? I am a concierge physician, yes. I have retained their family for several years, Miller answered, his voice tight. And you were appointed as Miss Sterling's OB-GYN by Caroline Pendleton when Ms. Sterling was approximately 8 weeks pregnant? I was recommended to her, yes, Miller corrected smoothly. Beatrice pulled a thick medical file from her desk. Dr. Miller, let's review your notes from August 15th. You wrote, and I quote, patient exhibits extreme paranoia, spontaneous weeping, and aggressive verbal outbursts. Strongly suspect early onset postpartum psychosis manifesting prenatally. You prescribed her haloperidol and a heavy dose of lorazepam. Are these standard prescriptions for a healthy pregnant woman? In cases of severe psychiatric distress, maternal stress can harm the fetus. Dr. Miller stated, adjusting his silk tie. I made a clinical judgment based on her erratic behavior. Erratic behavior, Beatrice repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Dr. Miller, did you know that on August 15th, the day you claimed Miss Sterling was weeping and aggressive, she was actually presenting a 3-hour keynote on urban green space integration at the Jacob Javits Center to an audience of 500 architects? Dr. Miller shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Patients can mask their symptoms in public. Let's talk about masking, Beatrice said, her tone hardening. She signaled to her paralegal, who handed her a slim, battered yellow folder. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit F into evidence. This is a shadow file kept by Clara Jenkins, a registered nurse who worked in Dr. Miller's private clinic until she abruptly resigned 3 weeks ago. Arthur Pendleton's head snapped up. For the first time all morning, genuine panic flashed across his perfectly sculpted features. Nurse Jenkins is present in the courthouse today, Beatrice continued, but her sworn affidavit states that Dr. Ben Miller instructed her to alter Miss Sterling's blood pressure readings, weight, and general health notes. When Miss Sterling reported feeling sluggish and confused, Nurse Jenkins discovered Dr. Miller was crushing sedatives into the prenatal vitamin compounds prepared exclusively for Miss Sterling by the clinic's internal pharmacy. The gallery erupted. Reporters in the back rows frantically typed on their phones. Caroline Pendleton went deathfully pale, gripping the wooden bench in front of her. "Objection!" Finch yelled over the noise. "Hearsay. This is an outrageous accusation based on the word of a disgruntled former employee." The Deirdre month. It is corroborated by financial records, Your Honor, Beatrice shouted back, slamming a bank statement onto the projector. On September 2nd, 2 days after Dr. Miller filed the official preliminary recommendation for an involuntary psychiatric hold, a shell corporation owned by Arthur Pendleton transferred $500,000 into Dr. Miller's offshore account in the Cayman Islands, a payment listed as a consulting bonus. Judge Harrison slammed his gavel, the sharp crack cutting through the chaos. "Order. Dr. Miller, I am reminding you that you are under penalty of perjury. Did you accept $500,000 to chemically subdue the mother of your patient's child and fabricate a psychiatric diagnosis?" Dr. Miller opened his mouth, closed it, and looked helplessly at Arthur's lawyer. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination," he whispered, the microphone picking up the tremor in his voice. Naomi closed her eyes, a shudder racking her body. The sluggishness, the constant brain fog, the terrifying moments where she couldn't remember conversations. It hadn't been pregnancy brain. It hadn't been the stress of the wedding. The man she loved had been systematically drugging her. He had been quietly turning her into the crazy woman he needed her to be. The courtroom took a brief recess, the heavy wooden doors sealing Naomi in a private conference room with Beatrice. Naomi drank a cup of water, her hands shaking so violently that water sloshed over the rim. "You're doing incredibly well," Beatrice said softly, placing a comforting hand on Naomi's shoulder. "We have them on the ropes. Now we just need to bring it home. We need to explain why you ran, and why Arthur's claim of abandonment is legally void under duress." When court resumed, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Arthur Pendleton no longer looked like the aggrieved, heartbroken groom. He looked like a cornered animal. "Miss Sterling," Beatrice began, taking her place at the podium, "let us move to the day before the wedding. October 25th. You had just discovered the binder, the burner phone, the fake ticket to Zurich. What did you do?" "I panicked," Naomi testified, her voice echoing in the vast room. "I couldn't call the police. The Pendleton family has the police commissioner at their charity galas. If I told anyone I thought my fiancé was trying to institutionalize me to steal my baby, I would sound exactly like the paranoid, hysterical pregnant woman doctor Miller's charts claimed I was. I realized that if I made a scene, Arthur would just accelerate the timeline. So, you played along? I had to, Naomi said, her voice breaking slightly. Arthur returned from Zurich that evening. He kissed me, asked how the baby was, and gave me a diamond tennis bracelet. It took everything in me not to vomit. But I smiled. I told him I missed him. Did anything unusual happen that night? Yes. After the rehearsal dinner at the plaza, Arthur brought me back to the penthouse. He poured me a cup of herbal tea I now know was likely drugged and handed me a document. He said his lawyers needed one final signature on an addendum to our prenuptial agreement. He said it was just a formality about real estate taxes. And what was the document in reality? Beatrice prompted. It was an irrevocable medical proxy and a waiver of rights, Naomi explained, looking directly at the judge. It gave Arthur complete control of my medical decisions in the event of incapacitation. It explicitly stated that I consented to any psychiatric treatments recommended by Dr. Miller and waived my right to contest a 72-hour psychiatric hold. He told me if I didn't sign it, the wedding was off. Not. And if the wedding was off, you could have just walked away, Finch interrupted, sneering. But you signed it, didn't you? You wanted the money. Objection, Beatrice snapped. Counsel is badgering the witness. Overruled. Let her answer, Judge Harrison said, his eyes glued to Naomi. I signed it because there were 2 private security guards standing outside the bedroom door, Naomi said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. Arthur told me they were there for my protection because the paparazzi were getting aggressive. But when I tried to leave the room to get my phone, one of the guards put his hand on my chest and pushed me back inside. I was locked in. I signed the paper because I knew if I didn't, I wouldn't leave that penthouse conscious. No. The horror of that night was painted vividly on Naomi's face. The realization that the man she slept next to was a warden, and the luxury penthouse was a gilded cage. Tell the court about the morning of the wedding, Beatrice instructed gently. October 26th, Naomi recalled. I was moved to the presidential suite at the Waldorf Astoria at 6 a.m. Arthur's security team drove me. Caroline was waiting there with a team of hair and makeup artists. I was put into my dress. It was a custom Vera Wang, heavy silk, layered tulle. It weighed 20 pounds. Were you allowed to be alone? Never. Caroline was always within 3 feet of me. I had to use the bathroom with the door cracked open. The suite was on the 42nd floor. There was a guard at the main door, and Arthur's personal assistant was sitting in the living room holding my cell phone, claiming she was managing well-wishers. How did you manage to escape, Ms. Sterling, heavily pregnant and surrounded by Pendleton staff? A faint ghost of a smile touched Naomi's lips. It was the only moment of triumph in a story of absolute terror. I used the one thing they couldn't control. My bladder, Naomi said. At 8 months pregnant, you need to use the restroom constantly. At 1 p.m., an hour before we were supposed to walk down the aisle, I told Caroline I was feeling nauseous and needed to use the master bathroom. I went in, locked the door, and turned on the shower to make it sound like I was sick. Not Sarah, Naomi leaned forward, the memory giving her strength. But I didn't stay in the bathroom. The master bathroom in the presidential suite has a secondary door that connects to a smaller adjoining suite, usually used for a nanny or a maid. They hadn't locked the adjoining door. I slipped through. Where did you go from there? The adjoining room was empty, but I couldn't just walk out into the hallway. The guards would see me. I found a housekeeping cart parked near the service elevator. The maid was cleaning a room down the hall. I took off the heavy silk skirt of my wedding gown, leaving just the corset and the slip. I grabbed a spare housekeeping uniform from the cart, a loose blue tunic and dark pants. I put it on over my slip, tied my hair into a tight bun, and put on a discarded medical mask that was sitting on the car. "And a service elevator?" Beatrice asked, the entire courtroom hanging on her every word. "I took it down to the basement levels, straight to the loading dock," Naomi said. I walked right past the hotel security. They were looking for a black woman in a massive white gown surrounded by an entourage. They weren't looking for a pregnant woman in a housekeeping uniform pushing a laundry bin. I walked out of the loading dock onto Lexington Avenue, hailed a yellow cab, and told the driver to take me to the nearest police precinct in New Jersey, far out of Arthur's jurisdiction. Naomi looked at Arthur. His face was a portrait of suppressed rage, his knuckles white as he gripped the desk. "I didn't leave him at the altar because I had cold feet," Naomi declared, her voice ringing with finality echoing off the high ceilings of the courtroom. "I left him because I was running for my life and the life of my child. I am not crazy. I am not unstable. I am a mother who outsmarted a monster." The revelation of Naomi's escape hung in the courtroom like smoke after a blast. The gallery, heavily populated by journalists and legal observers, furiously scribbled notes. Naomi took a slow sip of water, her hand finally steady. She had survived the hardest part, surviving Arthur. Now, she just had to survive his Neue. Miss Mina Sterling," Beatrice Carver continued, pacing deliberately in front of the jury box. "You escaped to New Jersey. You were 8 months pregnant, wearing a stolen maid's uniform, with no luggage and no medical records. What did you do next?" "I went dark," Naomi said simply. "I knew Arthur. I knew that the moment he realized I wasn't in that bathroom, he would freeze my bank accounts, track my cell phone, and mobilize his private security. I threw my phone into a storm drain on Lexington Avenue before I even got in the cab. I paid the driver with the $200 in emergency cash I kept tucked in my bra." "Where did you go?" "To a domestic violence shelter in Newark. I gave them a fake name, Sarah Jenkins. I knew if I went to a hospital or a police station, my real name would trigger an alert in the system. Arthur has friends in the NYPD. He has politicians on his payroll. If I was found before I had legal protection, I would be dragged back to the psychiatric hold, Dr. Rani." Miller had prepared. Beatrice nodded, projecting a large, blown-up image onto the courtroom monitors. It was a screenshot of a New York Post cover story dated 3 days after the cancelled wedding. The headline screamed, "Orna way and hunted. Heel abandoned et alota bidelusional fionye." Arthur wasted no time, did he? Beatrice asked softly. "No. When he couldn't find me physically, he decided to destroy me publicly," Naomi answered, her eyes narrowing as she looked at the headline. "He leaked stories to the press through anonymous sources. They claimed I was suffering from severe prenatal psychosis. They said I had a history of violent outbursts. They published highly redacted, fabricated medical records from Dr. Bade Miller to prove I was a danger to myself and my unborn child. And while you were reading these headlines from a shelter in Newark, what was the plaintiff doing behind the scenes?" "He filed an emergency ex parte motion for sole custody of our unborn child in this very court," Naomi said, her voice tightening. "He used the narrative he planted in the press to justify it. He claimed I was a transient, unstable woman who had kidnapped his heir. He hired private investigators to scour the tri-state area. Gregory Finch, Arthur's attorney, leaped to his feet. "Your Honor, I must object. The plaintiff was a terrified father looking for his missing fiancée and his unborn child. Painting his desperate search as a hunt is highly prejudicial. The objection is noted, Mr. Finch, but overruled. Given the evidence of the black binder and the offshore payments, I find the witness's characterization highly relevant," Judge Harrison retorted, his patience with the defense visibly wearing thin. "Continue, Miss Sterling." I knew I couldn't hide forever, Naomi said, shifting her weight in the uncomfortable wooden chair. I was due in a matter of weeks. I needed a doctor, and I needed to fight back. I used a payphone to call the only person I knew who wasn't afraid of the Pendleton family. I called Beatrice Carver. Beatrice offered a tight professional smile. And once I took your case, we arranged for a private medical evaluation by a court-appointed independent psychiatrist and a new OB/GYN, correct? Yes, both of whom cleared me with a perfectly clean bill of health. No psychosis, no paranoia. Just a healthy, heavily pregnant woman who had been subjected to severe emotional abuse and unauthorized sedation. Thank you, Miss Sterling. Matron out. I have no further questions for this witness at this time. Beatrice returned to her seat. Mr. Finch, Judge Harrison said, gesturing to the floor. Your witness. Finch approached the stand like a wounded bull. His entire defense strategy had been built on painting Naomi as a hysterical, unreliable narrator. With the physical evidence Beatrice had introduced, his options were rapidly dwindling. But he was highly paid to be ruthless. Miss Sterling, Finch began, his voice dripping with condescension. You claim you were terrified for your child. Yet, your response to this terror was to flee a luxury penthouse and subject your unborn baby to the squalor of a domestic violence shelter. I subjected my child to safety, Mr. Finch, Naomi fired back, refusing to break eye contact. Safety without a doctor? Without prenatal care? You put your child in mortal danger because of a paranoid delusion about a binder. It wasn't a delusion. The binder is sitting on your evidence table. A binder filled with contingency plans. Finch shouted, Arthur Pendleton is a billionaire, Ms. Sterling. His life is a target. He has kidnap and ransom insurance, he has disaster protocols, and yes, he had a contingency plan in case the mother of his child suffered a mental break, which, given your erratic flight across state lines, seems entirely justified. He didn't plan for a mental break, Naomi said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register that silenced the room. He orchestrated one. You are a master of manipulation, Ms. Sterling, Finch sneered. You realized you couldn't handle the pressure of high society. You wanted out of the marriage, but you wanted the Pendleton fortune. So you concocted this elaborate spy thriller, stole his money, and ran. I haven't touched a dime of his money, Naomi stated, and if you check his financial records, you'll see the prenuptial agreement I signed heavily favored him. I didn't want his money. I wanted my life back. Finch aggressively cross-examined her for another hour, trying to poke holes in her timeline, questioning her memory, and attempting to gaslight her on the stand. But Naomi remained an immovable object. The 80 days she had spent hiding, preparing, and healing had turned her fear into an unbreakable armor of resolve. When Finch finally retreated to his desk defeated, Judge Harrison called for a brief recess. The real battle was about to begin. It was time for Arthur Pendleton to take the stand. When court reconvened, Arthur Pendleton walked to the witness stand with the practiced gait of a man who owned the building. He swore the oath with a smooth, resonant voice, flashing a brief, sorrowful look toward the judge. He was playing the part of the tragic, heartbroken patriarch to perfection. Finch lobbed him soft questions for the first 30 minutes. Arthur expertly deflected the accusations. The binder. A misunderstanding, a brainstorming document drawn up by overzealous security consultants without his full approval. The payment to Dr. Miller. A philanthropic donation to his concierge clinic to secure priority care for Naomi. The flight to Portland. A brief visit to a Pendleton Holdings subsidiary. I loved Naomi, Arthur told the court, looking down at his hands, managing to summon a single glistening tear. I still love her. I was terrified of her family history of mental illness, yes. I just wanted to make sure she and our baby were protected. If I was overbearing, it was out of love. I am begging the court to grant me custody so I can provide my child with the care and stability he deserves. A few sympathetic murmurs rippled through the back of the gallery. Arthur was a master manipulator, and for a fleeting second the illusion worked. Then Beatrice Carver stood up for cross-examination. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She walked directly to the podium, opened a sleek silver laptop, and looked at Arthur with the cold precision of a sniper. "Mr. Pendleton," Beatrice began, "you testified that your trip to Portland on October 12th was a standard visit to a Pendleton Holdings subsidiary. Is that correct?" "Yes," Arthur said, his jaw tightening slightly. "That subsidiary is the Hopewell Surrogacy and Adoption Clinic, correct?" "It is a medical facility we invest in, yes." Beatrice pulled a stapled document from her folder and handed it to the bailiff. "Your Honor, I am submitting Exhibit G, a subpoenaed document retrieved directly from the secure servers of the Hopewell Clinic, dated October 13th. The day you were in Portland." Arthur's eyes darted to Finch, a flicker of genuine panic finally breaking through his polished veneer. Finch looked confused. This document hadn't been in the preliminary discovery. Beatrice had acquired it days ago through an emergency federal subpoena based on the wire fraud evidence. "Mr. Pendleton," Beatrice said, her voice ringing clear and sharp, "could you read the title of this document for the court?" "That Horace, but forum or maths the sweet." Arthur stared at the paper handed to him by the bailiff. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him looking like a wax figure. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "Let the record show the witness is unable to read the document," Beatrice announced. "I will read it. The document is titled Gestational Surrogacy Agreement and Pre-Birth Order." The courtroom fell deathly silent. "Let's look at the signatures," Beatrice continued relentlessly. "It is signed by Arthur Pendleton. It is signed by Caroline Pendleton. And it contains the forged, electronically copied signature of Naomi Sterling." "Objection!" Finch screamed, his face purple. "This is an ambush. It is the truth." Beatrice roared back, slamming her hand on the podium. "Sit down, Mr. Finch, before you find yourself implicated in federal fraud." Judge Harrison didn't even acknowledge the objection. He was staring at the document on his own monitor, his face twisted in absolute disgust. "Continue, Counselor." Mr. Pendleton," Beatrice said, leaning closer to the witness stand. "This document outlines an agreement. It states that Naomi Sterling is not the biological mother of the child she is currently carrying. It states that she is merely a gestational carrier, an incubator for an embryo created by anonymous donors and legally purchased by you and your sister, Caroline." Naomi gasped, her hands flying to her stomach. She knew they wanted to steal her baby. She knew they wanted to terminate her rights. But this was an entirely different level of evil. They weren't just going to declare her unfit. They had actively laid the legal groundwork to erase her biological connection to her own child in time. "Is this true?" Judge Harrison demanded, his voice echoing like thunder. "Mr. Pendleton, did you forge documents to alter the biological parentage of this unborn child?" Arthur swallowed hard, his arrogant posture completely collapsing. It was a protective measure," he stammered, his voice weak. "Caroline wanted to be listed as the mother. It would make the adoption process cleaner after she was declared unfit. The clinic director owed me a favor. It was just paperwork." "Just paperwork?" Beatrice laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You drugged your fiancé. You fabricated a psychiatric history. You prepared an involuntary commitment order. And when that wasn't enough, you committed federal fraud to legally erase her existence as a mother, so your sister could buy a baby using Naomi's womb." Caroline Pendleton let out a sharp sob from the gallery, burying her face in her hands. The reporters were dead silent, too stunned by the sheer depravity of the revelation to even type. "You didn't want a wife, Arthur. Beatrice concluded, her voice filled with venom. "You wanted a high-end, disposable breeding mare, and you thought because she had no powerful family she would just disappear." Beatrice turned away from him, walking back to Naomi. She placed a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "No further questions, Your Honor." Arthur sat in the witness stand, entirely broken. The golden facade of the Pendleton Empire had just been shattered on public record. Finch didn't even attempt to redirect. He was already packing his briefcase, mentally calculating the ethics violations he was about to face. Judge Harrison didn't call a recess. He didn't deliberate. He looked down at Arthur with a mixture of pity and profound contempt. "Mr. Pendleton," the judge said quietly, "in my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a case of such premeditated, grotesque, emotional, and legal abuse. Not only is your motion for custody denied in its entirety, but I am granting Miss Sile sterling full sole, legal, and physical custody of this child." The judge raised his gavel. "Furthermore, I am forwarding all exhibits, testimonies, and financial records presented today to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York with a strong recommendation for immediate criminal indictment on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted unlawful imprisonment. Court is adjourned." The gavel slammed down. It was over. The echo of Judge Harrison's gavel seemed to shatter the very foundation of the room. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. The gravity of the verdict and the impending federal charges hung over the courtroom like a guillotine. Then the illusion of Pendleton invincibility completely collapsed. Arthur Pendleton, the golden heir of Manhattan real estate, lunged forward, his hands slamming flat against the mahogany defense table. "Naomi, you can't do this." "That is my child," he roared, the polished veneer finally stripping away to reveal the desperate, controlling tyrant underneath. Before he could take a single step toward her, 2 heavy-set court bailiffs intercepted him, their hands gripping his custom-tailored shoulders with uncompromising force. From the gallery, Caroline let out a visceral, piercing scream. She scrambled over the wooden bench, her designer heels slipping, her perfectly styled hair falling into her face. "She's stealing my baby. Arthur, do something." "She's taking my baby," Caroline shrieked, clawing at the air toward Naomi. It was a pathetic, terrifying display of a family so insulated by wealth they truly believed they could buy reality. Naomi didn't flinch. She stood up slowly, her hand resting firmly on the curve of her stomach. She looked at Caroline, feeling a profound, cold pity for the woman, and then she looked at Arthur. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild as the bailiffs forced him to sit back down. "I'm not taking anything," Naomi said, her voice quiet but carrying perfectly through the chaotic room. "I am just keeping what is mine." Beatrice Carver placed a protective arm around Naomi's shoulders, guiding her away from the witness stand. As they pushed through the heavy double doors of the courtroom, the hallway exploded with the brilliant, blinding flashes of camera lenses. The very same reporters Arthur had paid to write hit pieces about the delusional runaway bride were now shouting questions about federal fraud and offshore accounts. Naomi didn't answer them. She didn't have to. The truth was already on the record. She stepped out of the courthouse and inhaled the crisp, unpolluted air of the city. For the first time in 14 months, she took a breath that felt entirely her own. 3 weeks later, on a rainy Tuesday morning in a sunlit private room at Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, Naomi went into labor. There was no Dr. Aris Miller lurking in the corner with a syringe of sedatives. There was no Caroline dictating the room's temperature. There was no Arthur standing guard at the door. Instead, there was soft jazz playing from a small speaker. There was an experienced, deeply empathetic midwife wiping the sweat from Naomi's brow, and Beatrice Carver, who had gone from fierce legal counsel to fiercely loyal friend, holding her hand through the final, agonizing pushes. When the piercing, beautiful cry of a newborn filled the room, the tension that had lived in Naomi's bones for the better part of a year finally broke. The nurses placed the warm, squirming weight of the baby girl onto Naomi's chest. The baby had a shock of dark, curly hair and eyes that squinted against the light. "Hello, Maya," Naomi whispered, tears of pure, unadulterated joy streaming down her face. Maya Joy Sterling. She bore her mother's name, and she would bear her mother's strength. She was safe. The fallout for the Pendleton dynasty was absolute and catastrophic. Following Judge Harrison's referral, the United States Attorney's Office moved with brutal efficiency. Warrants were executed at the Pendleton Holdings headquarters and the Upper East Side penthouse. The black leather binder and the subpoenaed clinic documents became the foundation of a sweeping federal indictment. Arthur Pendleton was arrested at Teterboro Airport attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. He was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and tampering with medical records. Denied bail, the billionaire was remanded to the Metropolitan Detention Center. His custom suits traded for a standard-issue jumpsuit. Caroline Pendleton, facing identical conspiracy charges, suffered a highly publicized nervous breakdown and was checked into a genuine, heavily secured psychiatric facility. A dark, poetic irony that the tabloids feasted upon for months. Dr. Eris Miller was stripped of his medical license and pleaded guilty to medical malpractice and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence. The Hopewell Clinic in Portland was shut down by federal regulators. As for Naomi, she didn't just survive the fire, she forged something new in the ashes. A year later, Naomi stood in the center of a sprawling, newly opened community botanical garden in the heart of Brooklyn. She wore a bright yellow sundress, the sun catching the rich glow of her skin. In her arms, 1-year-old Maya babbled happily, reaching out to touch the leaves of a weeping willow tree. Naomi's architectural firm had won the city contract to design the space, and she had poured her heart into it. It was a place of growth, of fresh air, and of deep, unshakable roots. She looked around the garden, watching children play and families gather. She had run from a gilded cage and stole a maid's uniform, carrying nothing but a hidden truth and the fierce, protective love of a mother. She had taken on a billionaire empire and burned it to the ground with the truth. She was no longer the runaway bride. She was Naomi Sterling, the architect of her own life and the undisputed mother of Maya Joy. What a terrifying, pulse-pounding journey of survival and maternal instinct. Naomi's story is a chilling reminder that behind closed doors, immense wealth and power can sometimes hide the darkest, most manipulative intentions. She trusted her gut, outsmarted the billionaire dynasty, and fought tooth and nail to protect her child from a gilded nightmare. The truth always comes to light, even when it's buried under a mountain of money. If Naomi's incredible escape and her ultimate courtroom victory had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button right now. It helps push these vital stories to more people. Share this video with someone who loves a jaw-dropping twist or needs a reminder of a woman's sheer, unstoppable strength. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next real-life drama and true survival story. What would you have done in Naomi's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.